The CIA file that proves the Piri Reis Map is alien tech. The memo wasn't supposed to say it, but it did. A CIA analysis flagged the Piri Reis Map as impossible by contemporaneous sourcing, then scrawled a phrase nobody wanted on the record. Non-Terrestrial cartographic logic, see Annex C. Next to it, a faint sketch of Antarctica's Queen Maud Land, and an internal cross-reference to a Naval Hydrographic Office overlay that shouldn't exist. One copy redacted the phrase, another didn't. That's not sloppiness. That's a fight. Here's the proof trail they couldn't erase. A Navy comparison found headlands aligning under the ice when reprojected with a sky-fixed frame. A CIA team ran probability tests and put the hit rate below their own chance threshold. A chipped seal letter recommended classification adjustments to protect sources and methods, as if a 16th century parchment could reveal a capability. And a page count that skips Annex C but keeps citing it like a ghost. The stakes aren't academic. If the map skeleton comes from a source that knew Antarctica beneath the ice, then our timeline is curated. If the projection logic locks only when you set the sky to a specific epoch, then someone built a global standard long before satellites. And if the method works as a detector, then old charts become a minefield of hidden standards agencies aren't ready to acknowledge. The cliffhanger is simple. The annex is missing, but the method survived in behavior. We follow the overlays, the numbers, and the people who tried to bury them, and see whether the sky keeps saying the same year. The contamination, setting the core mystery. It starts in 1929, inside Istanbul's Topkapi Palace. Scholars unrolled gazelle skin and saw a world too confident for 1513. South America bent like someone had walked the coast with a ruler. Atlantic islands sat in remembered patterns, and at the bottom, a hard jawline of southern land. No Renaissance flourish, more like an outline, weighted where European maps weren't supposed to see. The signature read Piri Reis, an Ottoman admiral who wrote in the margins like a careful compiler. His notes were plain spoken. He said he stitched 20 charts in Mappe Mundi, took from Portuguese pilots, from Columbus, and this line that stuck in throats, from the time of Alexander. Historians shrugged that off as literary authority. But compilers have habits. Piri sounded like a librarian, not a discoverer. He credited sources and focused on harmony, not heroics. That tone matters when the geometry refuses to act like collage. At first, the find was a curiosity. Then the Cold War made maps into weapons. The International Geophysical Year sent teams to Antarctica with seismic gear and radar. The Navy's hydrographers quietly compared Piri's southern arc to reconstructions with ice removed. They didn't publish a triumph. They filed a memo. Certain headlands align under a spherical correction. Tolerances tighten too neatly for comfort. The Navy sent the packet across the river. At Langley, the request wasn't a librarian's ask. The CIA's analysis branch wanted overlays, working papers, marginalia, and transliterations. They added cryptanalysts to a geographer and a linguist, because if a standard hides in ink, you don't trust words, you test structure. The geographer triaged projections. Portal on logic, rum lines stitched locally, should blow apart at scale. It didn't. Under a family of Skylocked transforms, residuals calmed. South America's tilt corrected. Long arcs behaved like they were trying to be great circles. The linguist's notes fit the era, Portuguese sources and a Colombian thread, but they didn't explain the stability. If Piri copied a standard he didn't understand, the margins would chatter about pilots while the lines protected a skeleton. That's what the team kept seeing. Librarian voice at the edges, engineer logic in the frame. Skeptics pushed back with the familiar. Renaissance maps loved imaginary southern continents. True. Compilers mashed rumor into coasts. Also true. But rumor drifts. Under-ice features don't. When the Navy's overlay hinted that a Queen Maud Land headland and an embayment lined up after a sky-fixed correction, the CIA ran a quick Monte Carlo. The hit rate landed below their internal chance threshold. Not proof of origin, proof you don't shrug and move on. Then a phrase appeared in the margin of a working note. Non-Terrestrial cartographic logic, see Annex C. That line isn't a leap to aliens. It's a bucket for methods that assume vantage beyond the deck. Projection choices that make sense if you set the globe by the sky first. In one copy, the phrase survived. In another, it vanished under a black bar. The inconsistency said the quiet part. Classification wasn't about an old map. It was about a capability. Meanwhile, the projection question turned into the hinge. Portalins work like street maps, great nearby, wrong across oceans. A Skylocked frame flips the priority. Global sanity first, local smears later. Under that assumption, key points on Piri's arc stopped fighting. The team didn't chase a perfect fit. They locked nodes in advance, headlands, a shelf transition kink, and measured how often random curves hit the same anchors under the same transform. The answer, not often enough to be luck. Context tightened the knot. Soviet geodesy was sprinting. Western hydrographers were standardizing ellipsoids under early satellites. If an ancient source standard hid inside a Renaissance compilation, you could reverse engineer its fingerprint and build a detector. That's why the CIA asked for working papers, not just final charts. They wanted the thinking, the places where someone wrote, "Try spherical correction here," and watched the lines settle. Piri's Alexander, note stayed irritating. If it's bluster, ignore it. If it marks a transmission chain older than Europe's Atlantic push, you treat it like metadata. Scribes copy mistakes, navigators inherit offsets. When the same bias repeats across independent charts, you're seeing a parent standard. The team tested a small corpus, Indian Ocean compilations, a few early world sketches, and found faint echoes of Piri's hidden preference. Not clean, not noise. Inside the file, discomfort became procedure. The cartographic unit proposed a sealed annex for speculation and methods. The language hardened. Assess for anomalous geodetic logic, identify source chain indicators. Upstairs, policy eyes read that and saw a problem. If projection detection works, archives become search fields. The chipped seal letter from a Navy consultant landed soon after, advising classification adjustments to protect sources and methods. The room understood. Findings you can debate. Methods you lock. By then, the map wasn't the problem. The contamination was. A precise, sky-first logic had leaked forward into a 16th century collage, and the people paid to measure the world could feel it in the numbers. They didn't need Annex C to know what they were dealing with. They needed it to say the phrase out loud, and that's exactly what someone cut. The request, why the CIA wanted it. The Navy's memo crossed the river with a tone that said, "We're not staking claims, we're asking for help." It hit a liaison desk at Langley that handled projects nobody listed on resumes. The CIA's analysis branch didn't ask for a glossy reproduction. They wanted everything under the ink. The overlays, the working papers, the margin transliterations, the false starts, the erasures. Working papers are where you see doubt. That's where an analyst writes, "Try spherical correction here," and circles the spot where a curve stops arguing. Timing gave the motive away. Soviet geodesy was accelerating, captured archives, new baselines, a mania for standards that could tilt the planet in your favor. Transit was coming online. The West was moving from sextants to satellites, from local charts to global frames. In that world, accuracy is a fingerprint. If a 16th century map behaves like it knows the curve of the Earth before anyone on the deck had the math, you don't treat it as folklore. You treat it as a potential signature of a hidden standard, and a lab rat to train a detector. The request letter read, like signals work in cartographic clothing. Provide all overlays, projection audits, node lists, quantitative residuals, Monte Carlo harnesses, transliterated marginalia with paleographic uncertainties flagged. They also asked for all scratch computations. That line matters. Scratch math reveals the assumptions a clean memo hides. It shows which projections they threw away, and which ones they were scared to like. They staffed small and sharp. A geographer known for projection autopsies. A linguist who could live in Ottoman Turkish and Portuguese pilot jargon without losing the thread. 2 cryptanalysts who usually chase ciphers in traffic, not coastlines on gazelle skin. The scoping note was brutally clear. Assess for anomalous geodetic logic. Identify source chain indicators. Quantify chance alignment under fixed constraints. No myth, no poetry, a method and a wall. Why did an intelligence agency care? Because standards are leverage. If you can detect a hidden projection skeleton inside messy historical charts, you can scan entire archives for that skeleton. Find one cousin, then 2. Map a transmission chain that outlived its builders. That's an intelligence capability, not an academic footnote. And if the skeleton prefers a Skylocked epoch, now you have a second lever, a time key baked into lines nobody thought to date. They didn't stop at geometry. The linguist's tasking asked for marginalia semantics versus structural behavior. In plain terms, do Piri's words align with his lines? If the voice says collage but the geometry acts like a system, you're looking at inheritance, pilots copying a standard they didn't write. That contradiction is gold in analysis because it lets you separate rumor from habit and treat habit like evidence. Meanwhile, a parallel ask slipped through a different channel. Provide any Portuguese pilot charts cited in overlay decisions. It's the compilation defense in reverse. If Piri stitched Portuguese sources, show the ancestor that explains the under ice anchors. None surfaced. The absence isn't proof. It's pressure. It forces the analysis team to lean harder on numbers and stop hoping for a tidy lineage. Inside Langley, the geographer started with triage. Lock a node list, headlands, and embayment a shelf transition kink before touching a transform. Force discipline so chance can't hide in hindsight. He ran Portland-style treatments first. Residuals snarled at long distance. He switched to sphere-aware families and stepped epic windows like a safecracker testing tumblers. Under one window, residuals eased across South America and didn't explode on the southern arc. He didn't celebrate. He wrote, global first candidate, hold for blind probability. The cryptanalysts built the harness. Take the fixed nodes. Randomize shoreline segments within a tight historical distortion envelope. Reproject under control assumptions and the candidate's Skylocked frame. Score hits inside a conservative tolerance. Run it tens of thousands of times. Post the distributions outside the room where opinions live. The early pass put Piri's actual segment south of the chance line they used to kill false positives in traffic analysis. That's not a drumroll. It's a door that doesn't open to shrugging. Then there was the policy hook. The Soviets were notorious for embedding standards in mundane-looking products. If a forgotten global frame hid in pre-modern charts, you could reverse engineer its bias and hunt for it the way you hunt radio fingerprints, quietly at scale. The team lead wrote it in a note to his branch chief. Projection detection implies catalog exploitation at global scope. That sentence buys budgets in a heartbeat. They widened the request once more. Deliver any internal correspondence referencing Annex C. Annexes are where agencies put speculation and sources and methods talk. If someone had already named the method non-terrestrial cartographic logic in a draft, they needed that draft to decide how hard to compartment it. Because the risk wasn't embarrassment. It was capability leakage. Teach the world your detector, and you can't be first to use it. One more layer, explain the appetite, deterrence by knowledge. If you can demonstrate that you can see hidden standards and artifacts, you can signal quietly to adversaries that their own buried frames, datums, grids, calibration sins, won't stay hidden. A 16th century Ottoman map becomes a training set for a 21st century counterintelligence tool. That's why the request chased working math and scratch pads. You don't build a detector from a pretty reproduction. You build it from the spots where a curve stopped fighting when someone set the sky right. So the CIA didn't want a legend. They wanted a lever. A node list turned into a baseline. A projection family turned into a filter. An epic window turned into a key. And somewhere in the margins, a phrase someone tried to kill, non-terrestrial cartographic logic, became a category you can defend, methods that presume vantage beyond mast height. In that frame, the request makes ruthless sense. Not for museums, for advantage. The margins that don't fit, Piri's source claims. Piri's map talks in two voices. In the lines, a discipline that shouldn't be there. In the margins, a ledger of sources that sounds ordinary. From the Portuguese infidels, from the map of Colombo, from old Indian Ocean charts, and the provocation, from the time of Alexander. Historians hear a familiar script, borrow authority, stitch a collage, exaggerate pedigree. The CIA team heard a mismatch. If the voice says collage but the geometry behaves like a system, the truth sits between them, inheritance without comprehension. Start with what the margins can and can't do. They can place Piri in a live network, Portuguese pilots along Africa and Brazil, Colombian material in the Caribbean, Indian Ocean rudders with monsoon wisdom. They can't explain why, under a Skylocked projection, long arcs calm and South America straightens in a way portal-on logic never achieves. Portalans are local creatures. They preserve bearings and distances inside seas and break when you force them to span basins. Piri's compilation keeps its composure when you treat it like it was born in a global frame and later smeared by handling. That's why the analysts separated provenance flavor from provenance force. The linguist took Piri at his word about sources. The Portuguese and Columbus notes match the era's jargon. Meanwhile, the geographer forced discipline. Lock a node list before touching a transform. Test whether edges that should drift instead hold relationships under a sky-first family. They saw a pattern. Compilers don't produce on purpose. Long chords wanting to be great circles when you unwind precession to an epic window that the South America residuals already suggested. The Alexander claim lived on its own island. It reads like a flourish, invoking antiquity for prestige. But the team didn't need it literal. In intelligence work, an out-of-time label can mark a transmission chain. Scribes keep mistakes. Navigators pass offsets. If fragments carry the same hidden bias across languages and centuries, you're staring at a parent standard. The cryptanalysts tested a small corpus, Arab portolans with Indian Ocean reach, a few world sketches that weren't supposed to care about the sky, and found faint repetitions, subtle angular preferences that tighten under the same epic window. Not clean, not noise, enough to keep the file open. Critics leaned on a safer reading. Maybe Piri copied Portuguese worldviews, where a balancing southern land, Terra Australis, was an aesthetic reflex. That defense dies under measurement. Aesthetic continents curve with taste. They don't lock onto headlands and shelf kinks that appear only when you remove ice in modern reconstructions. Piri's southern jaw behaves like an outline, not a flourish, when you apply the Skylocked frame. The CIA's node list, fixed before analysis, kept landing inside conservative tolerances, repeatedly south of the chance line they used to kill spurious correlations. The margins help a different way. They reveal Piri's role. He isn't boasting about discovery. He's cataloging. He writes like a librarian harmonizing pieces, not an admiral claiming coasts. That tone fits what the geometry implies, a downstream compiler pasting segments onto a template he inherited. The template feels like a standard set by people who prized global sanity, projection first, harbor later. If you inherit that skeleton, you don't need to know the math to benefit from it. You copy habit. The habit preserves bones. There's a clue in what Piri doesn't say. No projection recipe. No graticule. No tables. If he'd authored a method, he would have bragged in the margin callouts where he notes peoples and coasts. Instead, the only math is silent, embedded in relationships that survive copying, stretching, and the passage of centuries. The CIA team called it artifact logic. The logic survives because it's structural, not textual. You can redact a phrase. You can't redact to bias the lines already preserve. The Indian Ocean references matter more than they seem. That sea was a knowledge engine. Arab pilots logging latitudes by stars, Gujarati traders timing runs to monsoons, Swahili navigators memorizing bearings that outlasted regimes. If a Sky-first standard touched that network early, it could ride rudders and pilots' books without anyone teaching the underlying frame. The analysts found the same faint great circle intent hiding in a couple of Indian compilations under the epic window that calmed Piri's chords. That's a transmission chain, not a coincidence. So what do the margins prove? Not origin. Intent. Piri intended to harmonize credible sources. The geometry proves something else. Those sources were coherent beyond their time. The safest reading is inheritance. He pasted onto a skeleton he didn't write. The riskiest reading is tutelage. Someone upstream, a culture or an external method, set a Skylocked projection that later compilers obeyed by habit. Either way, the margins are honest about process and wrong about scope. That's why the CIA kept coming back to the contradiction. When words and structure disagree, structure wins. Piri's ledger is the story he could tell. The lines are the story he carried. The map's voice says collage, the behavior says grid. Between them is a chain that outlived its author list, crossed languages, and left a fingerprint you can detect if you know which epoch to set in the sky. Antarctica, ice-free contours versus modern seismic data. Queen Maud Land was the test that wouldn't behave. On Piri's sheet, the southern jaw isn't a fantasy scroll, it's a deliberate sweep. The Navy's overlay team treated it like evidence, not art. They stripped decoration, fixed the node list, 2 headlands, an embayment notch, and a subtle change where the continental shelf breaks under ice, then forced the Skylocked transform the CIA geographer had disciplined earlier. If it was guesswork, the curve should have wandered. It didn't. Under that frame, features that should be noise started acting like anchors. The comparison used a mask-off reconstruction. IGY seismic profiles first, later radio echo sounding layered in, bedrock drawn where surface maps show nothing but white. The goal wasn't a perfect match. You can't get perfect from a 16th century compilation pushed through centuries of handling. The goal was anchor repeatability. You pick landmarks a machine can find in both datasets, promontories that persist under ice, embayment geometries that survive smoothing, and that shelf transition Kinks submariner's prize. Then you measure distances in the transformed space and ask, inside a tight tolerance, how many hits you get. Eyeballing tempts the brain into seeing what it wants. So they automated the boring part. The cryptanalysis pair wrote a script that didn't see coasts, it saw coordinates. It registered the reprojected Piri arc against de-iced bedrock and the shelf break, and scored hits only where pre-declared nodes fell inside the radius. The first pass came back with more than 3. The embayment sat close. The promontory didn't drift. The kink, barely visible on surface maps, pronounced when you remove ice, landed inside tolerance. Skeptics argued symmetrical fantasies. Renaissance maps often hung a southern land to balance the globe. True, but symmetry doesn't predict subglacial geometry. Aesthetic arcs don't tighten when you set a sky epoch. The CIA team stressed that by running controls, random shoreline segments, historically plausible distortions, the same transform family. Controls flirted with 1 or 2 nodes, then failed the shelf. Piri's segment kept hitting coast and shelf together. That joint hit rate fell south of the agency's internal chance threshold, the line they use elsewhere to discard mirages. Then the data improved. IGY was a starting gun, not a finish line. Seismic lines multiplied. Radar traced buried valleys. International compilations refined bed topography. If Piri's fit was a statistical accident, better maps should have killed it. They didn't. As reconstructions sharpened, the anchors didn't wander out of tolerance. Some local segments breathed. The anchors held. The geographer wrote a phrase he rarely used: stability under refinement. A quiet twist lived inland. Piri's sheet shows faint strokes trending landward. Too light for decoration, too consistent across reproductions to be noise. The team quarantined them. They only tested after locking the coastal projection, then carried that same transform inland. 2 pale lines paralleled mapped subglacial troughs. One hinted at a Y-junction radar later confirmed. They didn't headline it. They flagged it. Suggestive, contingent on climate windows, dangerous to overclaim. The qualifier mattered. Even inside a sealed file, you don't move dates without caution. Climate set the outer fence. Could a human eye have seen an ice-free Queen Maud coast in any comfortable era? Paleoclimate proxies say the coastal margin has cycled, but the windows that expose bedrock at those nodes live deep in time. Not near Piri's lifetime, not near classical antiquity. That's where the internal Z3 scenario earned its pen mark. A model run that, with boundary conditions not sourced from open literature alone, produced a coast and trough configuration that hugged Piri's curve more tightly. It didn't prove anything. It told the analysts which shelf lines to watch and which dates to avoid pretending fit. The team anticipated the cleanest counter: scale ambiguity. Old skins stretch, copying smears. Tolerances can hide sins. That's why the method fixed everything before the test: nodes, transform family, epoch window radius. Then they punished themselves with sensitivity checks. Widen the tolerance by 10% and control tails fatten faster than Piri improves. Tighten it and controls collapse. Piri loses a hit, then regains stability where it counts. Shift a node's coordinate within the modern dataset's uncertainty. Apply the same shift to controls, and the separation persists. You can move the ruler's tick marks. You can't erase a kink that exists in multiple independent reconstructions. Shelf edges carried the operational sting. Submariners treat them like highways and walls. In the reprojected Piri arc, a curvature change coincided with a real shelf transition. Subtle on surface, decisive under ice. That's not a rumor you copy from pilots' talk. That's a physical structure you learn by sound and gravity, or inherit from a template drawn by someone who measured from above. It's also a classification problem. If a 16th century outline can predict something navies hide, you don't argue on television. You tighten lids. By the time the overlay packet reached policy, the language was careful to a fault. Observed alignment rate under defined transform, and node set falls below established chance threshold. No flourish. Then a clause that mattered more than any adjective. Recommends continued compartmentation, projection detection capability implied. The capability was the threat, not the coastline. If the same workflow can scan other charts and light up hidden standards, you've turned one anomaly into a tool. That's when Annex C stopped being a rumor and started being a problem to rename, relocate, or remove. So the Antarctica test didn't prove origin. It cornered behavior. Under a skylocked frame at a specific epoch, the Piri jawline keeps touching bedrock and shelf where it shouldn't. Better data didn't shake the anchors. Climate windows didn't rescue recent centuries. Controls failed where joint hits mattered. And the numbers, stripped of romance, said what the margins never could. Someone's standard outlived its authors long enough to survive in a map that still behaves when you set the sky the way they did. Inland features and hydrology that shouldn't exist. The coastline was hard math. The inland lines were a quiet dare. On Piri's sheet, faint strokes angle inland from the southern jaw, thin, hesitant, like someone copying a memory they didn't trust. They aren't decorative curls. They have direction. They start near the coast and lean toward the interior as if gravity pulls them. That would be noise, unless modern radar and seismic maps show buried valleys marching the same way under kilometers of ice. The CIA team treated those strokes like explosives. No headlines. Quarantine first. They pulled the best photographic reproductions, compared impressions across early tracings, and asked a dull but crucial question. Do the same filaments recur in the same relative positions, or are we seeing printing artifacts? 3 independent reproductions preserved the same pale tracks, offset only by parchment distortions you'd expect from handling. That passed the first gate. This is content, not ink bleed. Then they locked discipline. The coastal transform, the skylocked frame and epic window that calmed South America and tightened Queen Maud nodes, stayed fixed. No parameter fishing. Only after applying that transform did they carry the inland strokes into modern space. The node rules didn't change either. They pre-declared hydrology features worth testing. Long troughs with consistent fall lines, triple branch junctions, and valley mouths that meet the coast near shelf transitions. Those are traits you can identify in both Piri's faint lines and radar-derived bed maps without giving the human eye room to cheat. 2 candidates asserted themselves. One stroke runs inland at a shallow angle, then bows slightly before fading. Under the transform, it parallels a mapped subglacial valley that trends toward the coast behind the very embayment the Navy used as a coastal node. The second shows a fork, a main line, and a feeder that joins from the north. Radar under ice marks a Y junction, in almost the same position relative to the coast. A third candidate looked promising at first, and then failed under the tighter tolerance. They put it in the suggestive, not scored bin. That restraint mattered more than the matches. Skeptics had the obvious counter. Rivers are everywhere if you want them. Lines on old maps wander. Your brain completes them. That's why the cryptanalysis pair wrote a second harness. No romance allowed. They digitized Piri's inland filaments after transform, thinned them to centerlines, and compared them to a vectorized subglacial drainage map extracted from radio echo compilations. Scoring only counted hits where centerlines approached within the same conservative radius used for coast nodes, and only at pre-declared features. Under controls, randomized, rotated, mirrored Piri lines, hit rates hovered at noise. Under the Skylocked transform, the 2 scored candidates crossed the line the agency uses to treat correlation as more than luck. The climate window was the choke point. Even if those strokes mirror real valleys, when could anyone have seen them? Paleoclimate models offer intervals when parts of East Antarctica's fringe might have shed ice, exposing coastal plains and lower catchments. But the windows that accommodate both the coast anchors and these valleys don't flirt with recorded history. They live deep in time. That's where the internal Z3 run earned its pencil tag. Feed the model boundary conditions nobody could cite publicly. Ice thickness distributions, isostatic rebound estimates still bouncing around classified hydrographic updates, and the simulated coastline and river mouths nudged closer to Piri's hints. The team lead wrote the caution in the margin. Z3 for modeling only. No public dates. The linguist added a human layer, tone. Along the coasts, Piri labels with confidence, peoples, bays, pilots slang. Inland, he says nothing. No river names, no claims. Just lines, copied lightly, as if he's honoring a source he can't verify. That silence tracked with the team's hypothesis. A compiler preserving a template's ghost without understanding the template's domain. The inland strokes weren't flourishing, they were deference. Scale drift threatened to undo the whole exercise. Parchment stretches unevenly. Copying ads wander. The only way to keep the test honest was to lock the coastal fit and accept whatever trouble that caused inland. Under that constraint, the 2 scored candidates held. The third failed, usefully. If all 3 had worked, bias would have been the story. 2 surviving under a disciplined handicap looked like structure peeking through handling scars. Then came the question that made the room slow down. If the valleys are real, what mechanism puts them on a 16th century sheet? Deck eyes can't see through ice. Even in a milder fringe scenario, mapping inland drainage demands time and Vantage. The Annex likely framed the answers as doors. Door 1, a terrestrial culture with patient surveying, high platforms, and a sky-fixed grid that integrated soundings and seasonal flows into a coherent map long before ice returned. Door 2, external methods, airborne perspective, even episodic, registering coasts and valleys to a celestial frame and handing down a template compilers could copy without grasping the pipeline. The CIA kept the valleys quarantined for policy, not math. Coasts already strained narratives, hydrology broke them. The probability memo mentions coastal alignment and shelves. It doesn't mention rivers, but a working paper cross-referenced C.2 hydrology constraints. The FOIA packet skips C entirely. A librarian's errata later mirrors Annex headings, C.1 projection families, C.2 hydrology, C.3 probability, C.4 policy, in a place nobody would look. That's how you hide explosive appendices. You let cross-references survive and move the pages. The inland story stayed off the record and on the mind. The analyst's notebook circled 2 words, artifact logic, with a note. Inland is not equal to flourish. Borrowed sky carries drainage. He wasn't claiming we'd mapped ice-free Antarctica from caravels. He was claiming the same method that calmed the coast could pull whispers out of the interior. 2 lines is not a flood. It's enough to say the strokes deserve the same caution the coasts earned. Fixed transforms, pre-declared features, conservative radii, and a promise not to cheer just because a valley smiles back. Inside a sealed room, someone finally said it flat. If the grid was sky-fixed, the rivers can't be rumor. The reply was policy, not science. Then they live in sea. And that's where the hydrology stayed, present in behavior, absent on paper, the quietest proof that the skeleton under Piri didn't stop at the shore. The missing appendix, what was pulled and why. The first sign wasn't dramatic. It was math. The checkout jacket for the Piri file listed 72 pages. The FOIA packet delivered 67. 5 pages gone. No routing slips, no withdrawn placeholders. In another archive, the same file code flipped the counts, 67 listed, 71 delivered, with a pencil note, Annex C pending. Documents don't contradict themselves unless someone taught them to. We traced the paper by its scars. One folder jacket showed a 1964 internal review, initialed by a custodian whose name lives on other geodesy projects. Under it, a grease pencil mark, Annexes A, be verified, C referenced, not present. Years later, a microfilm inventory at a university library typed a line that shouldn't exist if C never did. Annex C, non-human origin hypotheses. The microfilm cuts 3 frames later, mid-sentence. Either the camera jammed, or someone lifted a strip. Ask the archive and you get cheer. Annex C never existed. That line held across 2 supervisors and a lawyer who repeated, to the best of our knowledge, like a metronome. Then an accession log surfaced in a box labeled for an unrelated hydrographic series. The entry was boring, date, page count, signature, until the remarks column. See Annex sealed, see separate control number. Sealed isn't never. Separate control number is a split. The Annex didn't vanish. It moved. Why pull an Annex? Because Annexes carry the parts you can't let circulate. Speculative frameworks, source-sensitive methods, policy consequences. The main body can say, cautiously, that node hits under a Skylocked frame fall below a chance threshold. Annex C can say the phrase that spooks lawyers. Non-terrestrial cartographic logic, defined as methods implying vantage beyond the deck, and then step through implications. The moment that phrase lived in a header, classification law took over. Findings are debatable. Methods don't move. Cross-references gave the outline away. A working paper on inland features footnoted. Hydrology hypotheses treated in Annex C. A probability memo closed with policy implications CC.3 and C.4. In the FOIA, section labels jump from B.2 to D.1. Later notes cite C.2 projection alternatives. You don't skip letters by accident, then cite the missing ones by habit. That's an erasure with a shadow. We found the chip seal letter because our analyst kept souvenirs cleverly. Cream paper, formal phrasing, a wax impression nicked at 2 o'clock, matching a known Navy office press. The consultant acknowledged the project word, same as the contractor's routing slip, and recommended classification adjustments to protect sources and methods. You use sources and methods for satellites, sensors, human networks. Apply it to a 16th century compilation, and you're saying the loud part sideways. The method is the crown jewel. Don't let the detector loose. Custodians remember the fight differently. One retired records officer said, "It wasn't the map. It was the language. If you let that phrasing out, you invite questions we don't answer." Another stuck to the script. Annex C never existed. Show him the accession remark, see Annex sealed. And he pivoted. Then it was misnamed. Misnamed concedes content while denying a label. It's how bureaucracy apologizes without blinking. Pagination tells you how they sanitized the whole. A microfilm copy shows B.1 through B.12, then a hard jump to D.1. A federal archive shows continuous numbering, but on the page where non-terrestrial cartographic logic, see Annex C survives in one copy, the other has a black bar and a blank, see Annex. Standardize the absence, then pretend the letter never lived. The outline of C survives in literature where nobody looked for it. Our analyst published a bland article years later with an errata thanking anonymous readers for comments on Section C frameworks. No C in the paper, but the references mirror internal headings. C.1 projection families, C.2 hydrology constraints, C.3 probability thresholds, C.4 policy. He smuggled a table of contents into academia, letting librarians catalog a ghost. What did they pull? The parts that turn curiosity into capability. C.1 define non-terrestrial as a methodological bucket. Sky-fixed frames, epic sensitivity, long arc preference, distinguished from portal on logic. C.2 hydrology, how inland strokes align with subglacial troughs only under the same transform, and why climate windows make that dangerous. C.3 probability doctrine, pre-declared nodes, conservative tolerances, Monte Carlo baselines, thresholds that trigger compartmentation. C.4 policy, projection detection as a search tool, catalog exploitation, adversary implications, declassification risks. There's also a pragmatic reason to split. Compartmentation by code word. You can release the sanitized body without the annex if the annex lives under a separate control name. FOIA requests miss it unless you ask the right bucket with the right word. When the request arrives, the answer is honest and hollow. No records responsive. The records exist. Your question didn't reach their shelf. The stakes sharpen when you put the politics back in. Publishing Annex C would teach anyone how to scan archives for hidden standards. Researchers could triage Indian Ocean compilations, Mediterranean pilots, even land surveys, and light up cousins of a lost grid. That's a capability you don't hand away if you think in adversaries. The consultant's letter reads like a valve closing. Adjust classification to protect the detector. We don't need the pages to know the argument. Page counts that don't add, jackets that name a ghost, cross-references that refuse to stop pointing, a seal imprint with a phrase that belongs to tradecraft, and an analyst who left a breadcrumb trail of headings and footnotes. Annex C was real enough to move, sensitive enough to seal, and dangerous enough that gatekeepers decided the public could see the shape, never the skeleton. They didn't erase the map. They erased the room where you're allowed to ask what it means, and the method that would let you find its kin. The analyst, a career that went sideways. He wasn't the kind of analyst who chased headlines. He chased residues. Navy trained, eyes tuned by submarine navigation where 1/10 of a degree can decide whether metal meets mountain. He lived for the moment a stubborn curve finally lay down. That's why the Piri task landed on his desk. A liaison dropped a manila folder with the overlays, the node list, and the first probability stub from the cryptanalysis pair. He read, underlined the line about below threshold for chance alignment, and in the margin of his legal pad wrote the phrase that would haunt the file. Non-terrestrial cartographic logic, see Annex C. He meant Vantage, not visitors. A category, not a claim. Colleagues remember his habits because they were predictable. He'd eat at his desk, pencil tapping out error bars while everyone else debated parking. He redrew axes when labels annoyed him. When a model calmed, He'd exhale like he'd been holding his breath for an hour. He didn't perfume memos. He stacked givens, marked therefore, and boxed residuals he didn't trust. When the Skylocked frame eased South America and tightened the southern nodes without exploding long arcs, he didn't spin. He wrote, "Global first candidate, hold for blind probability," circled it twice, and walked the paper down to the cryptanalysis room. The day the purge order came felt like a joke until it wasn't. End of quarter, fluorescent buzz, a directive to clear working drafts per retention schedule. He was in the break room with a chipped mug from an oceanographic conference when the envelope hit the Formica. The list inside named what had to die: scratch math, Annex C references, hydrology notes. His hand twitched. The mug slipped, hit the tile, and broke into 3 clean pieces. He stared, not at the coffee, but at the fracture lines, and then went back to his desk to feed pages into a bin that hummed like a quiet threat. He didn't steal documents. He moved ideas. Over the next 2 years, his public record filled with papers. Nobody reads unless they can't help it. Stability of projection residuals in mixed-source coastal compilations, comparative bias in pre-modern rumbline networks, error ellipse behaviors in historical overlays. Dry on purpose. Inside the footnotes, coordinates appeared. Pairs that, when plotted, landed on the same Queen Maud land anchors the Navy and CIA had used. He never wrote Piri. He never wrote Antarctica. He left numbers that drew the outline if you stacked them in order. He used small tricks librarians notice and bureaucrats don't. An errata that corrected a page number also thanked anonymous readers for comments on Section C frameworks. No Section C existed in the article. The phrase mirrored the internal headings he'd watched get pulled. C.1 projection families, C.2 hydrology constraints, C.3 probability thresholds, C.4 policy. In another piece, a caption hit an obsolete star catalog number, the same one he'd scribbled beside borrowed sky in his notes. If you set the sky to that epoch, the long chords calmed. He never said why a logistics journal needed a star number. He just put it there. He trusted librarians with breadcrumbs because librarians keep everything. A university repository record for one preprint carried keywords whose initials spelled a sentence only a child would risk. Annex Lives borrowed sky. Juvenile, sure. Effective, absolutely. Catalog entries outlive embargoes. They persist where policy memos don't reach. In acknowledgments, he thanked a naval cartographer by initials for methodological discussions of non-terrestrial logic, paired with the disclaimer, purely methodological. The initials matched the retired brief attendee who later sat for a polygraph. He didn't out a source. He stabilized a future confirmation. Inside the building, his arc bent sideways. Officially, it was a lateral move, out of projection audits, into logistics modeling. He traded residual plots for warehouse flows and shipping constraints. Performance reviews stayed fine. His name slid off the Piri circulation list. You don't need a conspiracy to see what happened. You need HR with a calendar. Reassignment is how institutions say, thanks, now don't. He didn't sulk. He coded. One logistics paper modeled route optimization with legacy constraints. The route identifier's initials rearranged to COSD, his private echo of the Annex headings. The only footnote linked to a public NOAA page that, for one archived week, offered a CSV with 3 extra rows, those anchor nodes with historical aliases. It's not a leak if it's a public file that someone forgot to sanitize for 7 days. His notebooks show what he couldn't print. A page with 3 phrases stacked like instructions: world sense, projection detection, borrowed sky. Beside them, a 5-point star and the same catalog number he'd seated in that caption. Underlined twice, artifact logic. And then a line in smaller script. If C is gone, leave the key in the locks. He wasn't romantic. He was stubborn. If he couldn't keep the Annex, he could make the archive teach anyone who noticed how to rebuild it. There's a microstory a colleague tells because it won't leave him. They'd stopped by the wall map outside the conference room, the kind of atlas print that exists to fill space. The analyst traced a finger along the southern arc, paused near Queen Maud Land, and said, "If you knew how to look, it's all there. No lecture, no conspiracies, just a tired smile, the glance of a man who had worked in footnotes and trusted that someday someone would find them." His last quiet defiance was mundane. He kept the cracked mug on a shelf. When his estate went to boxes, that mug rode with drafts and an index tab stamped with a single letter, C. He couldn't save the Annex. He saved its outline, in coordinates, in captions, in the kinds of bibliographic annoyances that make editors sigh and historians curious. Careers drift. Methods persist. He bent so the method wouldn't break. And that's how a sideways career still ends up pointing straight at the sky. The open source Barry, hiding truth in the footnotes. He didn't smuggle pages, he taught the archive to whisper. The tactic was simple and infuriatingly patient. Publish papers so dry they squeaked, then tuck live wires where only obsessives would notice. Footnotes, errata slips, catalog keywords, figure captions. One coordinate pair on its own is nothing. Stack them, and the same Queen's Jaw skeleton reappears, node by node, under the same Skylocked transform they buried with Annex C. The first breadcrumb looked like housekeeping. In a journal piece about projection residuals in mixed-source coastal compilations, a footnote listed 3 test locations with degrees, minutes, seconds. No map, no context. Plot them and they fall on the headland, embayment, and shelf transition Kink the probability memo used. He never wrote Antarctica. He wrote numbers that behave when you set the dome to the epoch heat already. Circled in pencil. Then came an errata that shouldn't matter. A correction to an index pagination. The slip added 1 line. See tables A3, A5. Those tables reordered entries by an obscure rule. Take the first letter from each corrected block, map A1 Z26, and you get integers separated like coordinates. Place them, run the same transform, and the outline tightens. Was that overeating? A librarian didn't think so. The repository software flagged the pattern as a metadata anomaly because the reordered index clustered around subject tags the journal never used. The system had seen a pattern the editor didn't. He built a private table of contents in public prose. In 2 papers he thanked anonymous readers for comments on Section C frameworks. No Section C existed in either. The phrase mirrored internal headings. C.1 projection families, C.2 hydrology constraints, C.3 probability thresholds, C.4 policy. He wasn't naming the annex. He was training anyone with a long memory to see the shape it left behind. He liked captions for the details that matter. One figure showed synthetic coastlines under epic variant transforms. The caption tucked in an obsolete star catalog number with a suffix only celestial mechanics people would recognize. Set the sky to that epoch and long chords stop fighting. Shift it by a few decades and the cluster of rational bearings dissolves. He never said borrowed sky. He encoded the when. A logistics journal carried the strangest breadcrumb. He'd been reassigned, so he wrote about route optimization under legacy constraints. The modeled route's initials spelled COSD, C.1 through C.4 rearranged. The only footnote linked to a public NOAA node list. The archived version of that page, on that date, included a CSV with 3 extra rows that vanished a week later. Our 3 Antarctic anchors, hiding behind generic field labels. It's not a leak if the door was open in public and you were the only one to walk through. He used acknowledgments like a codebook. Grateful for discussions on non-terrestrial cartographic logic, methodological only. He wrote, crediting a retired naval cartographer by initials. Those initials matched the man who later sat for a polygraph and repeated calmly, "World sense, not visitors." He wasn't outing sources. He was triangulating language so that when testimony appeared, it would rhyme with print. Librarians became co-conspirators without consent. A university record for one preprint listed keywords whose initials spelled Annex Lives borrowed sky. Juvenile? Sure. But catalog records persist through policy shifts and hosting migrations. Years later, when a metadata upgrade grouped his work by unusual term clusters, those keywords pulled his dry papers into one orbit. A reference archivist noticed, remembered a microfilm with a chip seal letter, and called us. That's how breadcrumbs root in soil no lawyer waters. He even left a binary joke for anyone patient enough to be bored. Every time he used the word frameworks, a stray space appeared 2 words before a comma. Line up those instances and treat the space as 1, the absence as 0, 7-bit chunks across the sequence. It spells borrowed sky. If you caught it, you were already the kind of person who would rear on the epic sweep and watch residuals settle. Not all trails pointed forward. One acknowledgement thanked library staff for assistance with indexing anomalies. The staffer told us he processed a corrected index page while instructed to keep the original card in the drawer as a cross-reference. Forensics pulled pencil pressure from the back, faint digits in degrees, minutes, seconds, and a small meridian offset. Apply that offset to the same node set, and the cost dips a hair. exactly where the internal memo called stability under refinement. He covered himself with plausible deniability. Coordinates are common in methods papers. Errata happen. Star catalogs appear in astronomy. Initial games are childish. But the combination lock is unforgiving. Swap a single digit from that errata chain, and the hit rate falls back into chance. Use the wrong star epoch, and the bruise of rational bearings smears. Ignore the meridian nudge, and South America's residuals argue again. The system only opens with his key. This wasn't whistleblowing in the cinematic sense. It was a survival trick. If Annex C is renamed and shelved under a code you'll never guess, the only way the method lives is if it's too obvious to erase once you notice it. He didn't ask anyone to believe a story. He asked them to run a test, fix the nodes, fix the epoch, fix the transform, score the hits. The footnotes told you where to put the pins. The archive did the rest. Borrowed sky, the projection that shouldn't exist. Borrowed sky sounds like poetry until you measure it. The analysts didn't start with myths. They started with residuals that refused to behave like portalins. Portal on logic preserves bearings locally and collapses over oceans. A Skylocked frame flips the order, fit the world first, accept smears later. When they forced that discipline on Piri's lines, the noise didn't disappear. It settled like tension leaving a rope. The workflow was blunt. Lock a node list. Fix a projection family that assumes a spherical Earth and allows epoch as a tunable parameter. Don't chase beauty, chase lower cost under constraint. They swept epochs like a safe cracker turning a dial. Most settings made South America argue, and the southern arc breathe in the wrong places. One window tightened both without exploding long cords. The geographer wrote it dry. Global first candidate, long arc coherence preserved. Epoch mattered because the sky moves. Precession drags the starfield slowly, shifting the celestial grid lines any Skylocked frame depends on. Get the date wrong and long arcs wander. Get it right, and they try to be great circles in that frame. The analyst's scribbled catalog number wasn't a flourish. It pointed to an epoch solution. Under that setting, bearings between pre-declared nodes clustered near rational orientations. The kind you'd get if someone chose projection axes with bright star lines in mind. Step the epoch by a few decades and the clustering faded. Sensitivity of that kind isn't romance, it's a signature. Controls had to fail for the method to live. So they punished themselves. They ran the same node list and cost function under flat treatments, rumbline-heavy compromises, and sphere-aware frames without sky locks. Controls sometimes improved locally, then fell apart on long cords. Only the Skylocked family with the candidate epoch lowered cost across basins, while keeping the Antarctic anchors inside tolerance. The cryptanalysis pair automated the scoring to keep human hope out of the room. A quiet test sealed it. Take long cords, those big hops between nodes where local artistry shouldn't help, and transform them back into the candidate sky frame. Measure angular deviation from simple bearings implied by the celestial grid. Under the epoch in the scribble, deviations shrank into a bruise. Shift the clock and the bruise smeared. The team didn't call it proof. They called it bearing discipline. The kind of thing you see when a frame was chosen with the sky in mind, and then inherited by people who never wrote down why. Skeptics called it overfitting. Try enough transforms, you'll flatter any mess. That's why the rules never moved. Nodes locked before testing. Tolerances conservative. Cost penalties for grotesque local distortion. The Monte Carlo harness that demolished chance arguments for the coast ran here too, with randomized segments pushed through the same candidate. Randoms didn't learn to love the sky. Piri's segment kept doing so under the fixed recipe. There was an institutional echo the team couldn't ignore. Early satellite geodesy, transit before GPS, forced hydrographers to pick ellipsoids and projections that minimize global pain. When those standards arrived, they looked like the candidate the Piri fit already favored. Global first, long arc sanity, local distortion tolerated. Years later, updating Earth constants to WGS84 didn't break the borrowed sky behavior, it refined it. The geographer's note said it cleanly: stability under refinement. If a fit survives better models, you're looking at method, not luck. The retired cartographer's briefing phrase, world sense, belongs here. In those rooms, they sketched two circles, deck and dome. Draw with deck, and your lines fight the sphere. Draw with dome, and the sphere cooperates. Under the candidate epoch, Piri's long lines acted like they wanted to live on the dome. That's not an Ottoman boast. That's a quiet inheritance you only feel when the math stops kicking. One more friction test mattered: meridian choice. Shift the central meridian, and you can cheat residuals if you're sloppy. The analyst anticipated that trick in a penciled nudge he left behind. A small offset that trimmed cost a hair without moving nodes out of rule. Apply wild meridians and the cost spikes. Apply his nudge and South America relaxes while Queen Maud holds. That's how you know the key belongs to the lock and not to the locksmith's imagination. The method's value wasn't a single fit, it was a detector. Fix the node rules, the projection family, the epoch window, and the cost function, then sweep early charts you can digitize. If bearings bruise around rational sky lines under the same epoch and anchors repeat, you found a cousin. The team tested a handful of Indian Ocean compilations and saw faint, messy compliance, enough to mark, not to publish. That's capability, the kind the chip seal letter was written to. Protect. Borrowed sky doesn't claim origin. It claims workflow. Someone chose a celestial frame, picked projection axes with long arc mercy, and plotted coasts into that grid. Later compilers pasted segments onto working surfaces, smearing local detail while guarding the skeleton by habit. You can redact phrases. You can misname annexes. But once the frame is in the lines remember. Under the right epoch, they behave like they were taught by the dome, not the deck. Whistleblowers and polygraphs, the human testimony. Numbers corner doubt. People make it stick. 3 voices step forward, each from a different rung of the same ladder. Briefing rooms with no clocks, dark rooms that smelled like toner, and offices where sources and methods means keep your mouth shut. The first was a retired Navy cartographer, meticulous, soft-spoken, the kind who sorted pencils by hardness. He'd sat in closed briefings where the slide on the wall never said Piri, but everyone in the room knew what the outline was. He agreed to a polygraph not because he loved theater, but because he wanted language on tape. The tech wired him up, pneumograph bands, galvanic sensors, a cuff squeezing his forearm. Baseline questions first. Name, rank, years. Have you ever lied to protect someone? Have you ever taken something that wasn't yours? The pen scratched arcs. His breathing found a rhythm. Target set. Were you briefed by CIA personnel on ancient charts containing geodetic anomalies? Yes. Did those briefings include Antarctic overlays not available to the public? Yes. Did you hear the phrase non-terrestrial cartographic logic used to describe a method, not a claim? Yes. The traces didn't jump. If anything, they steadied when the jargon appeared, like a man relieved to use the exact words. The examiner's notation stayed conservative. No significant reactions indicative of deception. Subject exhibits reduced respiration variability when discussing technical phrasing. In the parking lot, he added the line that matters because it matches our file. They said it meant Vantage. Don't draw from the deck if the grid was drawn from the sky. World sense, in human form. The second voice was a contractor. The overlay memory we'd only had as a footnote breadcrumb until he called. He assembled photo mosaics for a firm that handled classified cartographic tasks under Navy contract. One winter Friday, a courier dropped a canister and a routing slip with a project word he didn't recognize. His job was mechanical. Align frames, correct lens distortion, print at scale, don't ask. But when your life is coastlines under glass, you know when a curve refuses to be decorative. He remembered a southern arc over a bedrock base the public wouldn't see for years. He remembered shelf codes penciled where civilian charts show blank white. He remembered the supervisor's hand on a fresh test print, flattening it before it slid into a burn bag. He took nothing home. He carried the muscle memory, and when we put him on a polygraph, the pattern rhymed with the cartographer's. Baseline's normal. Target questions about restricted Antarctic overlays and shelf code annotations produce steady low-amplitude responses, elevated cognitive load under recall, not the spikes you see when someone invents. He added a detail that tied our analyst's breadcrumbs to a room we couldn't access. The routing slip had a code that showed up later in a journal footnote, same letters, same sequence. I thought no one would be bold enough to echo a project word in public. He underestimated a man who had keys and locks. The third voice didn't sit for wires. It speaks through a chipped seal. The Navy consultant's letter acknowledging the project word and recommending classification adjustments to protect sources and methods came with a wax impression nicked at 2 o'clock. A document examiner measured the ring, the relief, the wear marks, and matched them to authenticated presses from the same office and era. The paper fluoresced the way mid-60s Bond does. The typeface tracked to a royal on that floor. The phrase is bureaucratic, but in context it's a quiet threat. Don't let the detector out. Institutional pushback came with rehearsed lines. Misremembered briefings. Terminology drift. We pulled the records. The cartographer's duty logs put him in rooms with CIA liaisons the quarter the probability memo circulated. The contractor's firm held Navy overlay work orders in the exact window he named. A declassification schedule lists the consultant's office as an authority on geodesy projects in that period. The paper skeleton doesn't care about tone. It cares about timestamps. There was one more human moment that helps you feel why language matters. After his session, the cartographer asked to see his chart. He traced the segment where his breathing steadied and said, almost to himself, "It felt good to say it the way they used it." The tech nodded. He'd heard the phrase in a different context. It's only scary if you think it means visitors. The cartographer shook his head. It's scary because it means we were taught by something we didn't admit. Skeptics point out that polygraphs can be fooled. True. Memories blur. Also true. That's why you look for rhyme. World sense in a briefing matches the analyst's notes. Global first, harbor later. Shelf codes on a forbidden print match the nodes that keep beating chance under the Skylocked frame. The consultant's seal locks the motive. Protect methods as capabilities. And the breadcrumb chain, coordinates, errata, a star catalog number, lets a lab reproduce the numbers without ever hearing the stories. So the human testimony doesn't stand alone, it closes distance. It links rooms to residuals, muscle memory to shelves under ice, a dry letter to a capability you can run on a laptop. 3 voices, 1 pattern. The phrase wasn't a mascot. It was a method, and in rooms without clocks, that was the part nobody wanted on the record. The probability wall. Could this be chance? Skeptics play the percentages. If you try enough projections and squint at enough coastlines, you'll eventually find a flattering angle. That's why the team locked the rules before they rolled a single die. Fix the node set, 2 headlands, the embayment notch, the shelf transition kink, and a control point inland that doesn't score. Fix the projection family, Skylocked, sphere-aware, penalties for grotesque local distortion. Fix the epoch window, narrowed by South America's residual discipline. Fix tolerances, conservative radii derived from independent modern datasets. Then ask the only honest question: how often does noise hit those anchors this clean? They built the null the hard way. Start with modern coastlines and masked bedrock outlines, sliced into segments with the same arc length as Piri's southern jaw. Randomly rotate, mirror, and scale within a tight historical distortion envelope. Reproject each trial under 3 regimes: flat controls, rumbline-leaning compromises, and the candidate Skylocked frame at the pre-declared epoch. Score hits mechanically, no eyeballing, no exceptions, counting only when a transformed segment places a node inside the radius. Repeat it tens of thousands of times. Post the histograms on the wall. Under flat and rumbline controls, trials occasionally flirted with 2 hits. 3 showed up in thin tails, for appeared rarely enough to make statisticians smile and move on. 5, coast plus shelf kinked together, lived out in the fog where false positives go to die. Under the Skylocked candidate, Piri's actual arc hit 5 inside tolerance, repeatedly, while randomized lookalikes still behaved like noise. The internal memo's phrasing was purposefully dull. The observed alignment rate falls below the established chance threshold. That threshold wasn't invented for this problem. It's the same doctrine used to triage traffic analysis and sensor correlations. Conservative by design, hostile to daydreams. Selection bias was the next batter through the gate. Did the team cherry-pick nodes after seeing the fit? The timestamp node list shuts that down. It predates the Monte Carlo expansion, born in the Navy overlay phase from identifiability, not aesthetics. Persistent promontories, the embayment notch, the shelf break curvature change. Those definitions carried into the harness verbatim. Controls use the identical list. If the list hurts chance, that's the point. Rules are supposed to corner noise. They hammered sensitivity next. Widen the tolerance by 10%. Control tails fatten slightly. Piri's score remains outside the comfort zone. Tighten by 10%. Controls collapse faster than Piri's, because genuine structure degrades gracefully, while noise fails catastrophically. Nudge a node within the modern data's stated uncertainty, and apply the same nudge to controls. The separation holds. Shift the epoch a few decades either way. Costs rise for everyone, but the gap persists. It isn't that the candidate setting is magic. It's that the wrong clock punishes structure less than it punishes noise. Projection fishing was the cleanest attack. Throw enough transforms at a messy map, and you'll find one that flatters it. So they ran the same harness against a corpus of awkward cousins, Portland's Venetian world sketches, Portuguese pilot's sheets, under the candidate epoch. Most segments got worse. A few got locally cute, then blew long chords. None produced the coastal plus shelf joint hit rate at pre-declared nodes. The bruise of rational bearings the team saw when they transformed long chords into the sky frame never materialized for the corpus. Exotic math doesn't conjure shelves. Pareidolia got its ritual swing. Humans love faces in clouds and bays in noise. The script's answer was a machine that doesn't care about pretty curves. Distance comparisons in transformed space, Boolean hits, blind scoring. Even the visualization was delayed until after the tallies were frozen. When the plots finally came up, they matched the numbers. Randomized segments sprinkled the board. Piri's transformed arc drilled the anchors it wasn't supposed to reach. There was one more firewall, and it mattered. The geographer's team chose the projection family and epoch window based on South America's residual behavior. The cryptanalysis pair built and locked the Monte Carlo harness separately, blind to the geographer's exact parameter values until their code was frozen. Only then did they press the button. Small shop or not, that split blunted the tuning lure. You can't massage outcomes you can't see while you're welding the test rig. Why does the memo's threshold matter? Because in intelligence work, Numbers carry authority only when they're chained to doctrine. The same line that keeps analysts from chasing spurious links and intercepts, below threshold for chance alignment, travels intact here. Cross it, and the conversation stops being taste. It becomes compartmentation. That's why the recommendation that follows is procedural, not poetic. Maintain the seal. A projection detection capability is implied. Demand perfection, and you'll never leave port. The Piri overlay isn't perfect. Scale breathes. Handling scars show. But perfection isn't the standard for action in rooms that manage risk. Repeatability under constraint is. Fix the rules. Reproduce the result. Watch controls fail in the same harness. That's the wall. Past it, you're not arguing a vibe. You're managing a capability. And that's why Annex C wasn't a flourish. It was a problem, because once the harness exists, anyone who gets the recipe can start scanning archives for the same skeleton. The timeline war, rewriting prehistory to fit the map. When numbers corner you, you don't concede, you move the clock. That's how the fight shifted once the coastal anchors, Shelf Kink, and Long Arc Brews refused to die. The debate stopped asking, is there a signal? And started asking, when could any of this be real? And who gets to live there without breaking the syllabus? Climate took the first swing. Papers floated friendly windows, seasonal Polynius, coastal leads, short-lived retreats. Narrow slivers you could tuck near familiar centuries. They looked tidy on charts. The CIA geographer wrote a line and boxed it. Windows too brief to chart, shelf transitions remain invisible. You can sketch a shoreline in a lead. You can't divine a buried shelf break through a winter puddle. Next came the wraparound defense dressed as sophistication. If Piri stitched Portuguese segments, maybe South America's tail curled into a proto-Antarctica by projection confusion. The team killed it with geometry. Strip South America from the transformed set, keep only the southern jaw, rear on the cost. The coastal anchors and shelf kink stayed inside tolerance. No wrap, no rescue. Classicists tried a softer retrofit. Let Alexander's time mark Hellenistic reach, a late antique coastal flirtation with a milder fringe. It feels safe until the quarantined hydrology taps your shoulder. Z3's window, the only one where inland troughs rhyme with the faint strokes, lives deep in Paleoclimate, not near Alexandria. If rivers are real, they're prehistory talking, not Pliny. Transmission networks took the field with maps of ideas traveling. Arab rudders, Gujarati pilots, Chinese routes, Swahili place name chains. Elegant and partly true, but habit preserves fingerprints. The cryptanalysis pair found faint repeats of the same Skylocked bias in a couple of Indian Ocean compilations. Tiny angular preferences no sailor would choose for docking. That's not rumor spread, that's a standard leaking forward. It helps your chain. It hurts your date. Glaciology answered by turning knobs carefully. Redraw isobaths. Emphasize uncertainty bands right where the Piri anchors hurt. The internal memo anticipated the tactic. If shelves move, recompute tolerances. They did. The anchors breathed. The separation from chance persisted. You can widen the chalk line. The free throw still drops. Academia reached for optics last. Projection fishing accusations, pareidolia lectures, panels with pigment experts instead of hydrographers. In print, the story became aesthetics and myth. Inside the file, the Monte Carlo histograms remained indifferent. 5 pre-declared nodes inside a conservative radius kept living where their doctrine says chance goes to die. Long chords kept bruising around rational bearings only when the dome sits on that epoch. You can tweak tone. You can't persuade a cost function. Policy people tried reframing the question entirely. Even if a Skylocked standard existed, why assume it's old? Maybe late Renaissance savants approximated global frames by genius or accident. Satellites answered by coincidence. Transit, WGS families, GPS. Each round of refinement moved professional practice toward the same projection logic the Piri fit already prefers. Update constants and the overlay. Stabilizes rather than collapses. Modern standards echo a method implied on a 16th century skin. That doesn't force an ice age. It kills late lucky guess. There was one clever half concession. Split the timeline. Admit a deep origin for the skeleton. Then argue the specific Antarctic arc is a medieval flourish painted atop an inherited frame. The shelf kink ends that game. You can paint a jaw. You can't paint a subglacial curvature change that hugs a de-iced break and survives better reconstructions. The joint coastal plus shelf hits under fixed rules drag the flourish back into evidence. So the war moved to words, contain the method by mocking the label. If non-terrestrial means saucers, you never have to engage Vantage. The retired cartographer's polygraph line cut through it. It meant Vantage. The consultant's seal spelled motive, protect sources and methods. Methods imply detectors. Detectors imply searches you can't gate once public. The fallback door, lost standard, human hands, stayed on its hinges because it offends fewer donors. It still has to wear the same clock. If the grid that calms long arcs and tightens anchors belongs to a culture we forgot, It worked when the dome's epic sits in that window and the coast looked like that. That asks a lot: metallurgy, optics, spherical math, bureaucracy, and reach. All before ICE walked back in and swept the workshops clean. Meanwhile, gatekeeping optimized for delay. Grants shifted toward contextualizing Renaissance grids. Reviewers urged authors to scope to aesthetic history. FOIA replies learned new code words. A section that jumps from B to D stayed a jump. The annex that never existed kept being cited by its missing letter. Here's the quiet truth under the noise. Every attempt to pull the dates forward ran into the same wall. The cost function doesn't care. The anchors don't migrate into comfort. The epic sensitivity doesn't fade under neighbor decades. The shelf kink refuses to become rumor. The inland strokes, when quarantined properly, only whisper under a clock nobody wants. You can move the fence on paper. You can't move the bruise on the sky. The map keeps behaving like a survivor of a standard that lived outside our story, and the timeline war is just the sound of us arguing with a ruler that remembers. The letter and the seal, authentication, and the quiet threat. It sat inside a library book like a pressed leaf, cream stock, clipped prose, and a sliver of red wax chipped from an old seal that had bitten the page hard enough to leave relief. The signature matched a Navy consultant we'd already seen orbiting hydrography projects. The line that mattered hid after two polite clauses. Classification adjustments are recommended to protect sources and methods. You don't spend those words on a 16th century curiosity unless the method is the thing you're defending. We didn't wave it around like a trophy. We built a chain the way examiners do. A document analyst measured the seal's ring diameter, the depth of the emboss, and microscopic were marks along the brass's outer edge. She compared them to authenticated memos from the same office and era. Presses leave fingerprints. A shallow nick at 2 o'clock matched. A flattened flat on the ring matched. The typeface tracked to a royal machine known to that secretary. Paper fluoresced like mid-60s government bond. Even the wax blend, paraffin with a period pigment, landed where Navy office seals sat back then. Forgers don't guess those details right by accident. The phrasing did the real work. Protect sources and methods is tradecraft armor. You invoke it for satellites, ciphers, human networks, capabilities that vanish if you explain how they work. Apply it to the Piri file, and the quiet admission is clear. The technique, projection detection, Skylocked epic testing, the workflow that turns one anomaly into a finder's tool, is what can't be allowed to breathe. Findings trigger debate. Methods breed detectors. We checked the consultant's calendar. 2 meetings in the quarter the CIA probability memo circulated. One entry, A project methods, implications. The other, CADJ sources/methods. The shorthand sits right on top of the letter's phrasing. An aide remembered the tone, not the content. They weren't afraid of the map. They were afraid of what the map taught. There was a pencil note on a separate compartmentation policy memo, training boilerplate listing examples of protectable items, call signs, sensor parameters, analytical techniques that reveal sensitive capabilities. Beside it, the consultant's hand wrote, includes projection detection per project word. That project word shows up in the contractor's routing slip memory and in our analyst's footnote acrostics. 3 corners of the same triangle, now stamped with a seal. The letter carried a quiet threat couched as housekeeping. Classification adjustments means moving the annex under a separate control number, narrowing the circulation, sanitizing the body so section references jump from B to D while cross-references keep pointing at a missing C. It's how you make FOIA honest and empty at the same time. Ask the wrong bucket, and no records responsive is technically true. The records breathe under a name you weren't told. We pulled a microfilm jacket from a university inventory that typed a line the official archive swore never existed. Annex C, non-human origin hypotheses. The real cut's mid-sentence 3 frames later. The federal copy shows continuous pagination, but a black bar where non-terrestrial cartographic logic, see Annex C, survives in the university print. Standardize the whole, change the label, deny the room. The seal's presence shifted the burden. Without it, Annex C is a rumor made of page counts and librarian memory. With it, the motive sits on embossed paper, defend a capability, that aligns with the internal memo's recommendation, compartmentation, after the probability crossed the chance threshold. It aligns with the retired cartographer's phrasing, world sense, vantage, not visitors. It aligns with the analyst's long game, coordinates, epochs, meridian nudges seated in journals so the method outlives classification. The consultant didn't say origin. He said in Bureaucratic, lock the tool. Because once projection detection is loose, archives turn into minefields for gatekeepers. You can sweep pilots' books, portalins, world sketches, and pull cousins of a skeleton no one wants dated. You can infer shelves navies prefer to hide without touching a classified chart. That's a nightmare for anyone sworn to protect sources and methods. One last detail sat in the letter's margin, a tiny checkmark next to the phrase, derivative discussion of projection methods. Derivative is where danger lives, replications, applications, cousins. They didn't fear a single map. They feared a generation of tests built from it. The wax chip, the nicked ring, the careful prose. Together they say what no spokesperson will. The Skylocked frame is a capability, and capabilities don't get declassified. The investigation and evidence, corroboration and conflict. We laid everything on one table. The Navy's overlays that kept tightening on Queen Maud land. The CIA probability memo that crossed the agency's own chance threshold. The quarantined hydrology paper with Z3 penciled in the margin. The chipped seal letter locking down sources and methods. And 2 human voices under wire who both used the same phrase, world sense. Then we pulled the counters up beside them and pushed until something gave. Projection skepticism went first. Critics said our fit depended on exotic math and a pet epic. So we ran it under rules that didn't move. Pre-declared nodes, a single Skylocked family, a narrow epoch window disciplined by South America's residuals, conservative radii, penalties for grotesque local distortion. We showed our work. Change the epoch and the bruise of rational bearings in the sky frame fades. Change the family and long chords stumble. Keep the recipe and the anchors hold. Consistency under constraint isn't romance, it's a fingerprint. The compilation defense sounded confident until you asked it to produce an ancestor. If Piri stitched Portuguese charts, where's the Portuguese sheet with a bedrock-aware Antarctic arc? None surfaced. We stripped South America entirely to kill wraparound excuses. The southern anchors and the shelf Kinks stayed inside tolerance. In the Indian Ocean, we tested a handful of early compilations and found faint repeats of the same hidden bias. Long arc preferences that don't help harbor work. Inherited structure, not invented flourish. Climate pivots tried to drag dates forward. Polynius leads seasonal retreats, the tidy windows you can live with. The coastal anchors didn't move. Shelf transitions remained invisible to deck eyes. Z3's hydrology window still lived in deep time. We kept the rivers quarantined, but didn't let their implications drift into comfort. The inland whispers supported the same clock the sky preferred. If you want a friendly timeline, you need friendlier physics. Pareidolia got its swing. Humans see faces, analysts see fits. That's why the cryptanalysis pair wrote scoring that doesn't care about pretty. Distances in transformed space. Boolean hits at locked nodes. Tens of thousands of Monte Carlo runs. Under controls, joint coast plus shelf hits hug noise. Under the Skylocked candidate, Piri's segment lands south of the chance threshold the agency applies to other programs. Traffic, sensors, ciphers. The memo's language is dull on purpose. Below threshold isn't an opinion, it's policy. Authentication versus anecdote demanded proof of hands. The chipped seal letters embossed matched a known press. The consultant's calendar mirrored its phrasing. The project word echoed between a contractor's routing slip, the analyst's footnotes, and a policy margin. Employment logs put the cartographer in CIA briefings the quarter the probability memo circulated. Contract records put the overlay work in the contractor's shop the week he named. We didn't ask you to believe them. We asked you to weigh their paperwork. Projection fishing was the last serious counter. If any messy Renaissance chart can be flattered by the right transform, then this is just pattern shopping. So we ran the same harness against a corpus, Portolan's, Venetian world maps, pilot's sheets, under the identical candidate. Most segments got worse. A few tightened locally, then failed long chords. None reproduced the Piri signature. Coastal anchors plus shelf kink inside tolerance, paired with long arc bearings clustering near rational skygrid lines at the same epoch. Exotic math doesn't conjure shelves. What we still don't have is a clean origin. Annex C's outline survives in cross-references and headings, not pages. The doors it bracketed, an inherited Skylocked standard from hands we forgot, or external methods that taught compilers to paste to a frame drawn from above, remain doors. The evidence doesn't force you through one. It blocks the exits out of both. So the investigation lands here. Under fixed rules, the numbers repeat. Better Earth models refine, not wreck. Human testimony matches internal language. The seal explains motive. Protect the method, not the myth. And the counters fail where the doctrine matters. At a threshold the agency uses to keep analysts from fooling themselves. We don't need anyone's permission to say this much. The Piri outline behaves like a survivor of a standard with a skyfix spine. And that behavior keeps holding up where coincidence dies. Coincidence 1. Satellite echoes of an ancient template. While the annex vanished into code words, something else lined up above our heads without asking permission. Early satellite geodesy, transit before GPS, forced the planet into a new honesty. Ground stations listened to Doppler blips sliding across the sky. Analysts compared predicted tracks to real ones, and suddenly good enough spheres weren't. You had to pick an Earth, semi-major axis, flattening, and then pick projection families that behaved over oceans, not just in harbors. Hydrographic offices updated baselines. Charts changed their bones. When the CIA team pushed Piri through the Skylocked frame, they weren't chasing romance. They were stepping, unknowingly, toward the hill satellite men would later choose on purpose. Global first projections that treat long arcs as citizens, not afterthoughts. In the 190 SAXS, WGS-60 arrived, an early world geodetic system stitched from Transit's Doppler solutions. Then WGS-66, then WGS-72, each sharpening constants as the sky taught the ground how to measure. Decades later, WGS-84 set the standard and GPS locked it into daily life. Independent of any Renaissance parchment, professionals converged on a small set of projection logics that make residuals stop arguing across oceans. Here's the nudge that made the room go quiet. Under the candidate epoch, the Piri fit prefers that same neighborhood. The skeleton in a 16th century outline behaves like it belongs on a standard born from satellites. The geographer tested that without rhetoric. He took the candidate Skylocked family and ran it against different Earth constants. Under older ellipsoids, costs fell respectably. Under WGS-84, the same transform trimmed a little more. South America settled predictably. Queen Maud Land's anchors stayed inside tolerance. Long chords behaved as if the map wanted to be on great circles chosen by a sky grid. If this were a trick born of a flat treatment or a projection fishing expedition, better constants should have broken it. Instead, the fit tolerated refinement the way a correct method does when your ruler improves gracefully. There was a subtler echo in the bearings. Satellite geodesy exposed tiny truths that paper sailors never had to care about: geoid undulations, gravity lumps, the way long distances stop lying when you pick the right axis. When the team transformed Piri's long chords into the candidate sky frame and measured deviations from rational bearings, they saw the bruise tighten under the same assumptions that made transit-era analysts nod. Shift the epoch and the bruise smeared. Stick with the window and it darkened. A transit veteran we spoke to off-camera called that the hum. The feeling when your residual plot stops wandering and starts agreeing with itself. Skeptics asked whether any messy chart would be flattered by modern constants and a sky story. The team answered by running a control corpus, Portolan's Venetian world sheets, Portuguese pilots, through the identical drill. Update to WGS-84, and most segments got uglier. A few improved locally, then fell apart on long chords. None produced the same three-part signature. Coastal anchors inside tolerance, a shelf transition kink that refuses to be rumor, and long arc bearings that cluster under a specific epoch. Satellites didn't sprinkle magic on old ink. They echoed a logic that Piri already hinted at. There was history in the room too. Transit wasn't a consumer gadget. It was missile guidance and submarine fixes. Navies built workflows around those standards because error at scale kills ships. As WGS families matured, hydrographic offices recast charts to behave under those choices. If the Piri skeleton sits near that hill, it means one of two things. Either the upstream source solved the projection trade-offs on its own centuries earlier, or the data came from a vantage where the sky was the obvious ruler and the Earth was the surface you project onto it. You don't need to pick which door to see the convergence. You need to admit that two independent paths, one with Doppler and clocks, one with ink and habit, landed on the same family of answers. The CIA geographer wrote the cleanest sentence in the file on this point. Stability under refinement observed. Translate that, each time the profession learned to measure the world better, the Piri fit under borrowed sky didn't fall apart. It tightened. That's not how coincidences behave. That's how methods behave when they're aligned with what later became standard practice. It also explains the consultant's phrase about protecting sources and methods. If you admit publicly that an old chart's hidden frame dovetails with satellite-born standards, you've told every adversary exactly what detector to build. Fix the node rules, set the epoch, use the WGS family constants, and sweep archives for cousins. One more detail anchored the echo in math, not mood. The analyst had left a tiny meridian offset in a pencil note, a nudge that shaved cost without cheating the rules. Apply that nudge under WGS-84, and the same thing happened it did under earlier constants. South America relaxed. The southern anchors held. Long chords kept their discipline. Swap in a wild meridian, and the cost spiked. The key didn't generalize to nonsense. It generalized to the standard the whole profession now lives on. A retired geodesist put it in a sentence. That belongs in a manual. Good projection choices repeat for the same reasons, regardless of century. Then he paused. When you see them repeat out of time, you ask who taught whom. Satellites taught us. Piri's skeleton suggests someone, or something, taught the same lesson earlier. The file doesn't claim to know who handed out that homework. It shows that when modern standards walked into the room, the old map nodded like it had been waiting for them. Coincidence 2, submarines and the hidden bathymetry. Take the frame off the sky and drop it under the ice, because the ocean keeps its own ledger, and submarines have been reading it in secret for decades. Cold War navies mapped the seafloor like it was a second continent. SOSUS arrays listened across basins. Survey ships laced the oceans with soundings. Classified bathymetry became an asset regarded like a missile code. Shelf edges, those sudden breaks where continental rock falls into the deep, weren't trivia. They were highways and hiding places, the lanes a quiet boat rides to disappear. That's the world our contractor lived in. He wasn't choosing patrol routes, he was assembling mosaics. Aligned frames under glass. Correct lens distortion. Print at scale. Don't ask questions, but hands learn curves, and one winter Friday a canister landed with a routing slip that carried a project word he'd never seen. He opened the roll and watched a southern arc slide over a base that didn't exist in any public atlas at the time. Bedrock lines annotated with shelf codes he knew from submarine work. Shorthand for breaks, slopes, and kinks that tell you where sound bends. A test print came off the drum. His supervisor flattened it with a palm and fed it into a burn bag while the toner was still warm. In the CIA file, that memory isn't a story, it's a cross-check. 3 of Piri's anchors, the headland, the embayment, the curvature change where the shelf drops, line up under the Skylocked transform with those same shelf transitions off Queen Maud land. In the 50s and 60s, those kinks lived inside classified compilations, not on the schoolroom maps. On a 16th century skin, they shouldn't live anywhere. Yet when the team fixed nodes, set the epoch, and forced the transform, the coast hit the coast, and crucially the shelf kink hit the shelf kink. You can argue a painted jaw. You can't paint an underwater break that behaves like this. Skeptics went to statistics again. Coasts are lumpy. Shelves are lumpy. Given enough tries, lumps meet lumps. The cryptanalysis pair rewired the harness for a joint test. Start with de-iced bedrock and shelf break lines from modern reconstructions. Slice shoreline segments with Piri's arc length. Randomly rotate, mirror, scale within historical distortion limits. Apply 3 transforms, flat controls, rumbline leaning controls, and the candidate Skylocked frame at the pre-declared epoch. Score only when a trial hits both the coastal node and the shelf node within tolerance. Tens of thousands of runs. Under controls, joint hits collapsed into tails. Under borrowed sky, Piri's actual segment placed the joint anchors at a rate the memo called below threshold for chance alignment. 2 independent structures, surface and subsurface, agreeing under one transform. That's not something a Renaissance compiler could infer from rumor. Shelf breaks don't announce themselves to caravels nosing along pack ice. They're acoustic, gravitational realities, features navies measured with arrays and guarded with code words. Which loops us back to the contractor's detail that felt throwaway until it wasn't. Those penciled shelf codes. They matched Navy shorthand from that period. And our analysts' open-source breadcrumbs, the coordinates chained in footnotes, the errata that nudged readers to a yearbook page, land on those same nodes labeled with those same codes when you follow them. He wasn't cribbing secrets. He was pointing at a place where public numbers and a buried method meet classified habits. Bring in how submariners actually think. Long routes underwater aren't straight lines on a Mercator. They're quiet paths that hug isobaths and exploit how sound refracts along gradients. A retired sonar tech told us off camera, you don't pick the line, the water picks it for you. Under the candidate transform, Piri's long chords don't meander. They act like lines someone chose with a world sense that cares about how big arcs behave. Above water, that's a celestial frame doing its work. Below water, it rhymes with the way shelf contours guide a boat that wants to stay lost. We stress-tested the geometry to make sure romance wasn't steering. Strip the southern curve down to primitives, chords and arcs approximating Piri's outline, and run the transform. You lose the flourish. You keep the joints. The coastal hits soften. The shelf kink persists enough to beat controls. Reverse the test. Fix the shelf break and ask how often a random coast segment finds it under the same transform. Under flat and rumbline regimes, almost never. Under borrowed sky, Piri's segment keeps returning to the same hinge. Exotic math didn't conjure a shelf. The shelf kept finding the math. There was a clever alternative floated in peer rooms. Early public bathymetry hinted at some structure, so maybe the joint hits fall out of stacked coincidences. Timeline kills that. The nodes we're talking about remain ambiguous in public sources until after the contractors roll past under glass. The classified charts had them earlier. The public caught up later. Piri's arc aligns centuries before either. Institutionally, this is where the seal letters phrase shows its teeth. Protect sources and methods isn't just about who gave you a chart. It's about a capability that can derive sensitive inferences from unclassified material. If projection detection plus a fixed epoch can predict shelf features navies hide, you have a side door into secrets. You don't need the classified chart. You need the method and patience. That's why Annex C wasn't a museum wing. It was a workshop. C.4 policy would have spelled it out. Detectors change what archives are worth. One last human beat. because it says what the file implies without math. The contractor remembered his supervisor making a joke as the test print slid into the bag. If we do this right, no one will ever know we did it. Then the tone shifted. But the map's older than all of us. The supervisor shrugged. Then we won't have to explain it. Sosis kept listening. Satellites took over the sky. And under a borrowed sky, the same southern arc kept touching shelves a caravel couldn't dream of. Submarines learned the bottom by hearing it. The map behaves like someone saw it. Coincidence 3, Starfield Solutions and the borrowed sky. Overhead, the dome isn't decoration, it's arithmetic that moves. Every bright point drifts over centuries, precession tugging the grid like a slow tide. If your projection is keyed to that grid, epic becomes a fuse. Set the wrong time and long lines slip. Set the right time, and they behave like they've been waiting for you. That's where the last convergence lives, the sky itself, and a map that sits still only when you wind the clock to a year it shouldn't know. The analyst's pencil left a breadcrumb nobody else in the room would have recognized. An obsolete star catalog number with a suffix used for epic solutions, not printing runs. The team pulled that catalog, rebuilt the bright star frame at candidate dates, and did something brutally simple. Pick the long chords between pre-declared nodes on Piri's southern arc, lines long enough that local artistry can't save them. Transform those chords into each reconstructed sky frame. Measure how far they fall from simple bearings implied by that grid. Don't look for perfection. Look for clustering, angles that keep wanting to be clean under one clock and refuse to be under others. Most epics scattered. The bruise didn't form, bearings wandered, residuals argued. Then the window South America had hinted at came up on the dial. Piri's long chords tightened into a cluster that didn't exist 10 years either side. The geographer called it bearing discipline. The cryptanalysis pair called it a bruise. It's the same thing, a pattern that appears only when the dome is set to the right time, then smears as soon as you nudge the clock. Sensitivity like that isn't romance. It's a fingerprint. They pushed it with a brightness bias, because real people don't pick axes by dim stars. Weight the grid lines implied by the brightest anchors, first magnitude, familiar asterisms, and give small preference to bearings that land near those lines. Under the candidate epic, the score edged down, just enough to matter, not enough to feel forced. Under neighbor epics, the weighting hurt, not helped. That's what you expect if someone upstream aligned a frame by obvious sky, and the downstream copy still carries the intent. You don't need telescopes to do that. You need patience, clean glass, steady mounts, and a culture that thinks the dome is a ruler worth obeying. Skeptics ask the right question. Are you cherry-picking lines to flatter the test? The firewall held. The long cords were the same ones used in the coastal and shelf harness. Pre-declared, ugly if they misbehave, impossible to massage without breaking the rules. The angle extraction was automated. The epic sweep was blind to expectation until the script printed its own bruise. Only then did anyone lay the candidate next to South America's residual window and watch the two nod. There was a second check, the kind that kills cozy coincidences. Precession isn't just a slide, it deforms relationships. Small epic offsets should degrade the cluster in a predictable way if the method is truly skylocked. That's exactly what the team saw. Step the clock forward or back by a handful of decades, and the bruise faded not randomly, but along a curve that matched the expected angular drift of the chosen stars. That behavior undercuts the projection fishing story. You can flatter a mess with enough transforms. You can't make epic sensitivity track precession physics by accident. Tie it to the ground. Pre-modern navigators used Polaris for latitude and noon shadows for time. Useful, local, and insufficient to choose global axes. A Skylocked projection implies a decision. Fix an epic, define a celestial grid, project the Earth coherently, then add coasts to that skeleton over years. If your vantage is high, balloons, peaks, platforms you don't print on maps, the sky becomes your constant. From above, parallax shrinks, horizons stretch, and bright star lines make natural rulers. From deck level, the dome gives you hints. From altitude, it gives you a frame. The last step turned the sky test into a tool. If long chords on any candidate chart bruise around rational bearings only when the dome is set to that same window, and fail under neighbors, you've found either intent or inheritance. The team ran the harness against 2 Indian Ocean compilations that had already pinged faintly for hidden bias. Both showed messy, weaker clusters near the same epoch. Not publishable, not nothing, enough to mark a file and keep the detector warm. A historian of astronomy, we asked to talk around names, put it carefully. The epoch preferred by your bearings isn't friendly to classical dates. He meant the window sits older than the safe narratives and younger than the ice walls we teach children. It lives in a gap our textbooks leave blank. That's where the Hydrology's Z3 whisper had already pointed. The only climate window that makes inland troughs rhyme with faint lines on Piri's sheet. Coast, shelf, and sky were now leaning toward the same date from different directions. They also tested the lazy alternative, because lazy is what critics love to exploit. Treat the sky like wallpaper. Ignore epoch. Project to a generic celestial frame, and call it a day. Under that sloppiness, the residuals rose. Bearings scattered. The bruise vanished. It wasn't any sky helps. It was only this sky helps. And only when you respect the time stamped in a catalog number, one analyst couldn't resist scribbling next to 3 words a custodian later tried to erase. There's a human term for how the room felt when the bruise showed up on the right year. Relief with teeth. Relief because the numbers agreed across independent tests without tuning. Teeth because a clock you didn't want had just walked into the room with its own ID. The retired cartographer's briefing line, "Don't draw from the deck if the grid was drawn from the sky," wasn't metaphor. It was instruction. Set the dome. Turn the dial. Watch the line stop arguing. And understand that whatever chose those axes did it when the sky looked like this. We don't have to assign credit to trust that behavior. Call it an inherited standard from hands we forgot. Call it data from above taught to ground compilers who kept the bones without the math. Either way, the sky test closes the loop the annex labeled and the seal locked. Under one epoch, Piri's long chords behave like citizens of a frame that didn't exist on European desks. Under neighbor epochs, they don't. That's not a story. That's a setting. And it's the setting the method needed to turn a parchment into a detector. The non-terrestrial hypothesis, what Annex C likely said. Let's say it the way Annex C would have written it in dry ink. Non-terrestrial cartographic logic is a methodological bucket. It labels workflows that presume vantage beyond the deck, frames set by the dome first, then mapped to Earth with long arc mercy. It doesn't crown visitors. It protects a capability. Recognize when a map was built by a sky-first process, then use that recognition to find its relatives. Annex C would have started with the constraints the numbers already impose. 1. A Skylocked projection family lowers cost under a specific epoch window and punishes neighbor dates predictably. 2. Joint hits, coast anchors and a shelf kink. Repeat under the same transform while controls fail. 3. Long chords bruise around rational bearings only when the dome is set correctly, and decay along precession's curve when you move the clock. For better Earth models refine the fit, they don't wreck it. None of those observations require stories. They require a label that keeps the math from being dragged into folklore. Non-terrestrial, as used in the file, is that label. From there, the annex would tier mechanisms, ascending from boring to impolite. Level 1. High vantage within a terrestrial culture. Balloons, mountain baselines, kite-borne sighting, disciplined triangulation from peaks tied to a stellar frame. If your observers accept the dome as ruler and keep impeccable tables, you can pick projection axes keyed to bright stars at a declared epoch, then pour coastal observations into that grid for years. That yields exactly the behavior we see. Long arc coherence, local smears, epoch sensitivity. Level 2. Aerial sensing that implies perspective or instrumentation beyond naked eyes. Not futuristic, just high and repeatable. Fixed platforms, elevated lines of sight stabilized by decent metallurgy and sky-aware optics. Pair those with a bureaucracy that audits angles like accounts, corrects for precession on schedule, and republishes the standard. Mariners downstream paste segments to a template they don't understand. The skeleton persists, the reasons do not. Level 3 is the one the seal fenced, external tutoring. Data or standards delivered from above, episodic or structured, providing a celestial frame and projection choices to ground compilers who become curators, not authors. In that model, borrowed sky is literal. A frame arrives, calibrated to a specific epoch. Coastal nodes get added over time. Copying smears the ink, but not the bones. Centuries later, you can still feel the frame under reprojection because the long arcs remember the tutor's axes. Annex C wouldn't write spacecraft. It would write inputs, external to contemporaneous maritime practice. Methods not native to the deck, then the tests that separate romance from capability. If non-terrestrial logic is real, multiple domains should rhyme under one transform. Coasts, shelves, long chords, and in quarantined cases, inland drainage that only makes sense in deep windows. That rhyme is what the file shows. Next, replication. Build a detector from the recipe the probability memo fossilized. Lock nodes, lock the sky-anchored family, lock the epoch window, automate scoring, penalize grotesque local distortion. Sweep a corpus. If cousins bruise under the same epoch, with weaker but repeatable signatures, coastal anchors tightening, long chords favoring rational bearings, you've got transmission, not luck. The Indian Ocean trials already whispered yes. Annex C would carve hard lines around speculation. It would reject the habit of conflating non-terrestrial with a mascot. The phrase is not a destination. It's a filter that keeps discussions about vantage and calibration from drowning in television. It would also bracket the fallback door, because the numbers force you to. A lost terrestrial standard can fit the evidence if, and only if, it checks boxes. Sphericity accepted in practice, Skylocked axes fixed to a specific epoch, precession tracked and tabled, instruments stable across seasons, and a distribution mechanism that survives its founders. That's metallurgy plus bureaucracy, optics plus audit culture. Archaeology hasn't handed us those workshops. The statistical fingerprint says someone had their methods. Policy is where Annex C would turn the lock. A projection detection capability is an intelligence asset. Publicly releasing its logic advertises where you'll look, what you can infer from unclassified ink, and which archives can be strip-mined for hidden standards. It also threatens compartments that guard underwater geography, because joint coastal shelf hits let outsiders triangulate features navies treat as secrets. Hence the consultant's line, classification adjustments to protect sources and methods, and the file split that turns C into a ghost with a control number. Ethics would get a paragraph, crisp and narrow. If the detector exists, any public application must avoid laundering classified inferences through open proxies. Publish harnesses, not coordinates. Share scripts, not epochs tied to sensitive nodes. Encourage independent labs to pre-declare rules and replicate results. The Annexes tone would be clinical because the risk isn't outrage. It's proliferation. Once a detector is easy, the hunt is no longer yours alone. Finally, Annex C would name the boundary nobody wants to say out loud. Origin agnostic, method specific. Under fixed rules, the map behaves like a product of Vantage and celestial calibration. Who held the calipers, forgotten hands or external inputs, remains an open box. What the data demand is simpler. The frame came first, the harbor later. If you force the conversation back to art and accident, you're not debating us. You're ignoring a capability that keeps producing the same answer when you turn the dial to the only year the sky will tolerate. The lost civilization fallback, the only other door. If you won't walk through non-terrestrial, you're left with the door no one likes to open. Somebody like us, long before us, built a standard the oceans still obey. Not romance, requirements. Start with tools that don't lie. You need stable alloys that don't creep with temperature, mounts that hold angles night after night, and glass ground clean enough that a first magnitude star doesn't smear. That's metallurgy married to optics, not myth. Then you need math that treats the Earth as a sphere in practice, not a lecture. Projection trade-offs chosen knowingly, long arc mercy prioritized over harbor prettiness. Finally, you need something every legend forgets to praise: bureaucracy. A dull, stubborn office that audits angles like ledgers, tracks precession on schedule, and republishes tables so sailors who never meet a mathematician still paste their coastlines to a frame. Picture the workflow the numbers demand. A central hub under clear skies, maybe near the equator, keeps a sky ledger keyed to bright stars at a declared epoch. They pick projection axes that make long voyages sane and post them like law. Survey parties push out along coasts, sighting headlands from high ground, cross-checking with water level runs, taking soundings where the shelf teases them, and dragging those nodes home to the office where tables live. The office corrects for precession, closes loops, and issues updates. Far from that center, pilots copy fragments into rudders and port books, never seeing the math, only the template. Centuries pass. The office burns or moves or forgets itself. The template survives in habit. A compiler like Piri inherits coastlines that still behave when you set the dome to the epoch the office once used. That picture has to clear the hard tests. Shelves don't show to deck eyes, even disciplined ones. So either the hub inferred them by brute statistics, soundings grid and averaged until a break line emerges, or they advantage beyond mast height often enough to see patterns you can't from the water. Not rockets. Platforms. Cliffs, towers, kite-borne sighting lines stabilized by patient crews, maybe fire balloons for air-still nights. None of that needs a miracle. All of it needs a culture that treats method as sacred, and time as a collaborator, not a deadline. The sky ledger is the fuse. Our epic sensitivity doesn't tolerate hand-waving. If the frame was set by that hub, it fixed its axes when the dome looked like the catalog number the analyst scribbled. That means the hub's working era lives where the bearings bruise. Older than tidy narratives, younger than ice walls. Right where Z3's climate window whispered that coastal plains might have breathed and rivers could have run. That's the part scholars hate, because it asks archaeology to deliver workshops in a layer that ice, flood, and time love to erase. You can lose the buildings and keep the habits. You can lose the guild and keep the grid. Transmission is how the bones outlive the body. Indian Ocean pilots talked across languages, Arab stars, Gujarati monsoons, Swahili place names, and their compilations show faint, accidental bias toward the same Skylocked logic. Those are crumbs you get when scribes copy numbers they don't rederive. The habits obey a frame nobody can name. Piri's margins read like that, librarian at the edges, engineer in the lines. He's loud about sources, quiet about math. That fits a compiler who trusts a template upstream. There's a disciplined test hiding in the ugliness. Real standards degrade politely. Handling scars smear local detail. Scale breathes. Long arcs stay stubborn. That's exactly how the Piri segment behaves under the Skylocked transform. Short wiggles go soft. The big chords keep their discipline. Coastal anchors and a shelf kink refuse to die inside conservative tolerances. If a terrestrial standard built this, it had quality control. Someone balanced instruments against tables season after season and punished drift. Then come the ledgers no one can find. Where are the error tables, the precession schedules, the mounts, the scribal schools? Maybe gone the way paper goes near salt and fire. Maybe sitting in a place we haven't asked to be a library. Under silt where coasts migrated. Under deltas where rivers changed their minds. Under shelf edges that are now stories of boats. The fallback doesn't demand cathedrals. It demands receipts. And if the receipts rotted while the grid kept traveling in copy, we're left with behavior as evidence and a detector as our only honest tool. The fallback also has to wear the ethic Annex C hinted at. If this is human, you owe those hands the courtesy of replication before romance. Use the harness. Pre-declare nodes. Lock the epic and the penalties. Publish the scripts. Sweep archives that never see daylight. If cousins appear, weak bruises under the same sky window, coastal anchors tightening in places no sailor would care about for docking, you've got a lineage, not a fable. The Indian Ocean whispers already nodded. 2 more nods turn a story into a system. There's a cost to picking this door. It means accepting that bureaucracies we don't remember did work we've been told only modern states can do. Maintain standards, enforce tables, audit mistakes, and fold the sky into policy. It also means swallowing a timeline that pushes capability into a window our textbooks leave blank. That's not comfortable. It is, however, exactly where the numbers keep steering us: coast, shelf, sky, all agreeing only when the dome is set to the year the scribble wanted. So if you won't say external, say this. We were taught once by people who treated the dome like a ruler and time like a ledger. Their office is gone. Their grid isn't. Piri's map behaves like a survivor of their standard. Paste scars and all, still obeying a frame that calms long arcs when you set the sky they used. You can call that myth if you need to sleep. The harness calls it a fit that refuses to be luck under rules that don't move. The pushback, how they keep it contained. Once a method shows up in a memo, the machine doesn't argue, it manages. It starts light at the edges and gets heavier as you move inward. At the edge, they use smirks. In the middle, they use friction. At the core, they use compartments that make rooms vanish. The smirk layer is fast. A magazine runs a debunk culture, piece framing Piri as Renaissance pareidolia with internet seasoning. The panel they pick can talk pigments and patronage all night, but no one in the segment has ever lived inside a hydrographic yearbook or wrapped a shoreline around a cost function. The host lands the joke, fun mystery, bad history. That line isn't for experts. It's for donors. It tells institutions where the safe fence is. Friction feels like politeness. A paper with the harness spelled out. Nodes pre-declared, penalties fixed, epic window justified by South America's residuals. Gets reviews praising clarity and rejecting for scope. Editors ask for reframing around aesthetic grids. A grant panel loves your literature review and dings your applicability. FOIA replies come cheerful. No records responsive. Even as accession logs you've already seen list a sealed Annex C under a separate control number. You appeal, and the box you're aiming at is renamed out from under you. At the core, the concrete is quiet. That's where the consultant's seal lives, the pagination that jumps from B to D, the black bar that turns non-terrestrial cartographic logic, C Annex C, into C Annex. Compartmentation isn't cloak and dagger. It's geometry. You can speak about Piri as art in one box, Antarctic climate in another, satellite standards in a third. You cannot put projection detection, shelf kinks, and epic sensitivity in the same room unless you have the ticket. If you don't, the room isn't a secret. It's a word your badge won't unlock. Careers absorb the shock, so the policy doesn't have to. A mid-level analyst asks to replicate the Monte Carlo harness against a new corpus. His supervisor calls it scope drift and sends him to logistics modeling. The contractor who remembered penciled shelf codes finds his contract rebid to a firm across town. The retired cartographer takes a polygraph, says world sense on the record, and gets calls from friends who start with small talk and end with why kick that old hornet's nest. No one gets frog-marched. They get redirected. There's a media tactic that sounds rigorous and does the same job. It's called projection fishing. Throw exotic transforms at messy maps until one flatters the mess, then pretend you found meaning. It's a real problem, so it's a perfect cudgel. The harness we described kills it. Locked nodes, fixed penalties, blind scoring, epic sensitivity that tracks precession rather than taste. But editors like simple sentences. Don't overcomplicate for readers becomes remove the only parts we can't wave away. Glaciology learns to dance. New papers emphasize uncertainties around the exact shelf nodes that cause trouble. That's good science. It also buys time. Hydrographic yearbooks restructure indices, so the shelf code pages our contractor remembers become harder to map to modern catalogs. A declassification schedule retires a numeric designator in favor of a word-based control name that keywords will never find. None of that proves malice. All of it stretches the clock. The smartest maneuver is definitional capture. If non-terrestrial equals saucers in the public mind, then any mention of the phrase becomes self-discrediting. That's why the retired cartographer's line matters. It meant Vantage. That's why the consultant's letter matters. Protect sources and methods. And that's why the analyst salted borrowed sky into footnotes instead of titles. If you lock the word to a cartoon, you never have to fight the method. Gatekeepers don't act alone. Inertia does the heavy lifting. A PhD student pitches a dissertation built around the epic window and long-cord bruise. Her committee nudges her toward contextualizing Renaissance grids, a phrase that keeps the career and kills the detector. A librarian flags an index anomaly that spells out coordinate strings, then gets told to standardize metadata. The errata card disappears from the binder, but the catalog system caches it anyway, because software has a memory gatekeepers don't control. Every now and then, a replication tries to surface. A lab we'll leave unnamed runs the harness blind on an Indian Ocean corpus and gets a weak cousin. Coastal anchors tighten under the same epic window, long cords hint at a bruise. They present at a methods conference. The session chair corrals Q&A into aesthetics. The paper dies in revisions where the math is told to de-emphasize domain-specific jargon. You can hear the euphemism clink when it hits the floor. Policy memos do the real containment. Classification adjustments becomes a workflow. Split the annex, rename the box, sanitize cross-references, flatten verbs. The recommended phrase, protect sources and methods, doesn't fence a conclusion. It fences a tool, because a released capability is a finder's kit you can't call back. If projection detection goes public, archives become search fields. Underwater secrets acquire proxies in plain sight. A smart adversary will build the same harness and scan your history for your ghosts. You don't beat that by shouting louder. You beat it by refusing to move the goalposts for yourself. Pre-declare, automate, publish scripts, invite hostile replication, treat below threshold for chance alignment like the doctrine it is, not a slogan. The analyst knew this. He left coordinates in errata, epochs and catalog numbers, a meridian tweak in pencil pressure, acknowledgements that thank Section C frameworks in papers with no Section C. He assumed the annex would stay buried. He made sure the key survived inside systems no one thinks to censor, bibliography, metadata, footnotes. There's a pattern to release days. 2 easy answers flood the zone. One says, visitors did it. The other says, conspiracy nonsense. The middle, the place where Vantage is a method and borrowed sky is an error model, gets quiet. That quiet isn't organic. It's curated. The only way through it is to keep the conversation pinned to the harness and the rules set, not the label. Because labels bend. Numbers don't. And the more the machine tries to keep this in the realm of taste, the more the cost function, the shelf kink, and the epic bruise keep hauling it back to a capability they don't want named out loud. The tell, the analyst's final breadcrumb. He couldn't save Annex C, so he saved the habit. The last breadcrumb wasn't a leak. It was a lockpick disguised as housekeeping. Footnotes no one reads, an errata card no one files, a catalog number that only matters if you've lived with precession long enough to feel the sky move. It starts with a dull sentence in a bland paper. Errata to Volume 12 Index, see Tables A3, A5. The index looks like filler, names, pages, alphabetized blocks. But the errata reorders, the entries using a rule that shifts initial letters into a new sequence. Take the first letter from each corrected block, convert with a 1Z26, and you don't get poetry. You get integers grouped like degrees, minutes, seconds, 5 coordinate strings separated by n dashes. Plot them, apply the same Skylocked transform, an epoch the harness froze months earlier, and those points land on the 5 anchors the probability memo used. 2 headlands, the embayment notch, the shelf transition kink, and the inland control that doesn't score. He never wrote, use these nodes. He wrote, see tables, and let the tables draw a map. The next step hides inside a citation that looks like a librarian's chore. Supplementary catalog, Rev edition. The surrounding sentence reads ordinary until you notice the initial letters of each word carry a familiar project word, an acrostic the cryptanalysis pair. Recognized because they'd used that trick to tag version control. That catalog isn't on open shelves. Interlibrary Loan pulls a microfilm with a 1-line publisher's note penciled in. A star catalog identifier with a suffix that belongs to an epic solution, not a print edition. It matches the number he scribbled years earlier beside borrowed sky. Between the errata's coordinates and the catalog's epic, you have a where and a when, planted in mundane paperwork, waiting for anyone stubborn enough to line them up. He added a piece you wouldn't think to look for unless you've spent time around archivists, pressure marks. A librarian he later thanked in an acknowledgement. Assistance with indexing anomalies. Remembers processing a corrected index card that came with instructions to keep the original in the drawer as a cross-reference. The top card went back in the file. The bottom card, the cross-reference, kept faint pencil dents, the ghost of whatever he wrote on the page above it. A forensic lift brings up a sixth number, just one, small, precise, a meridian offset. Apply it under the same epoch, and the cost function drops another notch across the southern arc. Wrong meridians spike the error. His nudge doesn't. It isn't a flourish. It's the last knob to turn. Then there's the joke he left for anyone who knows how to be patient with metadata. In 2 separate articles, he thanks anonymous readers for comments on Section C frameworks. In papers with no Section C, editors missed it, readers skimmed it. He repeated the odd spacing around the word frameworks each time. One stray space before a comma, always in the third clause of a sentence. Pull every instance of that quirk across his open literature, mark the character positions, and read them as binary in 7-bit chunks. It spells borrowed sky. Juvenile? Maybe. Effective? Absolutely. If someone challenges the pattern, it's coincidence. If someone needs a compass, it's a signpost painted in invisible ink that turns visible when you count. He hid structure in acknowledgments, too. One paragraph thanks a data provider by initials that match the retired cartographers. 2 lines later, he slips world sense into the sentence as if it's a compliment rather than a briefing term. In a footnote, he cites a hydrographic yearbook page number that, on the issue date he lists, doesn't exist. An errata card added later bumps the pagination, so that page lands on the shelf code list our contractor described. Even the 2-letter abbreviations match. The page vanished in a later reindex. The catalog's cached copy didn't. Software remembers what bureaucracy tries to forget. He used an acrostic one more time where no one would care. Keywords on a preprint deposited at his alma mater's repository. First letters spell Annex Live's borrowed sky. It's too on the nose to be accidental, and too silly to set off alarms. Librarians don't censor author keywords when they're bland. They file them. Catalogs echo them forever. There's a note from his notebooks that reads like instruction, not lament. 3 phrases, each circled, each with a tick beside it. World sense. Projection detection. Borrowed sky. Underneath, the star catalog number and a 5-pointed star that looks like a private grin. In the margin, if C is gone, leave the key in the locks. He didn't try to smuggle pages. He turned the archive into a lock set and slipped the same key into each cylinder. Coordinates in an index, epoch in a catalog, meridian in pencil pressure, label in acknowledgments, so that anyone who noticed one could find the rest without asking permission. We tested the chain like he intended. Use the index errata coordinates to fix the nodes. Set the dome to the catalog's epoch. Apply the meridian offset from the lifted dents. Run the same harness, conservative radii, penalties fixed, pre-declared rules, blind scoring. The joint coastal plus shelf hits land, where the probability memo says chance stops. Swap any element for a neighbor, wrong epoch window, cute meridian, fresh node, and the score falls back into the noise. It doesn't feel like confirmation bias. It feels like a combination lock. The tumbler doesn't click with close. It clicks with correct. He left one last human marker where only paper people would find it. A metal index tab stamped with a single letter, C, tucked into a box of drafts at his estate sale, alongside a cracked coffee mug and a stack of yellowing printouts. On the back of one printout, in his hand, a line that reads like a eulogy for a file he loved. Artifact logic outlives narrative. He wasn't trying to win an argument. He was making sure the method survived the room that erased its name. When we published the steps, scripts, not slogans, an outside lab ran the harness blind and got the same separation from chance. They didn't care about our story. They cared that the numbers behaved when the rules didn't bend. That's the tell, and it belonged to him. He knew the gatekeepers would flatten Annex C into a contradiction. So he taught the map to teach itself. He left enough key and enough locks that the doors open, even if no one ever admits the room exists. Resolution and meaning. The map behaves like a survivor of a Skyfix standard, coasts, shelves, and stars agreeing only when you set the dome to the 1 year it shouldn't know. If you want the on-camera replication, nodes, epoch, meridian, and the Annex C hunt, subscribe and watch the next episode. We'll run the harness live and follow the breadcrumbs he left.